I woke up to hear knocking on glass. At first, I thought it was the window, until I heard it come from the mirror again. They celebrated the first cryogenic freezing. He had no way to let them know he was still conscious. I made a friend today named Charlie. I'm playing at his house, but it's cold down here in the basement. I wonder when Charlie will let me go home. The grinning face stared at me from the darkness beyond my bedroom window. I live on the 14th floor. I was looking at my phone and saw a picture of me sleeping. I live alone. Working the night shift alone tonight. There's a face in the cellar staring into the security camera. You get home tired after a long day's work and ready for a relaxing night alone. You reach for the light switch, but another hand is already there. You start to drift off into a comfortable sleep when you hear a name being whispered by your wife next to you. You then remember about her death 2 years ago. I was having a pleasant dream when what sounded like a hammer woke me. After that, I could barely hear the muffled sound of dirt covering my coffin over my own screams. You hear your mom call you from the basement. You thought she left the house about 30 minutes ago, but as you walk to the basement door, she walks straight through the front door. Nurse's note: born 7 pounds 10 ounces, 18 inches long, 32 fully formed teeth, silent, always smiling. The longer I wore it, the more it grew on me. She had such pretty skin. You hear the scream across the hallway, but your eyes won't open and you can't move. Being the first to respond to a fatal car accident is always the most traumatic thing I see as a police officer. But today, when the crushed body of a little boy strapped in his car seat opened his eyes and giggled at me when I tried to peel him out of the wreckage, I immediately knew that today would be my last day on the force. I always wondered why my cat cried when I left her alone at night. The night we buried her, I woke up to the feeling of someone stroking my hair and the rough voice whispering,
"Good kitty."
I was in the bathroom looking into the mirror and fixing my hair. As I put down my brush and looked at myself, I saw my reflection blink. I heard the doorbell ring, then peeked outside. The pizza delivery guy is at the door. But I didn't order any pizza, and definitely not from someone wearing a pig mask. If you get scared at night, make sure you don't keep your eyes closed for too long. There's a reason you're scared, and now you can't see them approach. The wailing from the baby monitor just won't stop. The problem is, my daughter is with her mother this weekend, over 200 miles away. When I was 7 years old, my mother and I moved to a small town in Massachusetts. It was a rough time for me, as my father had just up and left a few weeks ago. My mom told me that he had taken a better job somewhere else. She told me that he still loved and cared about me, but even at a young age I understood that he just left us. It was Halloween week, and I started at my new school on the 25th of October. As a stubborn 7-year-old, I insisted on walking there by myself. My mother frowned, thought it over, and then agreed, with one condition. "Alright," she told me. "As long as we walk on that path together every night before school starts, and you promise to stay on that trail." She had bought a small 2-bedroom cottage less than a mile from my school, so it wouldn't be that far. It was a nice place, but I guess with my father gone, nothing could really feel like home. The evening before I began school, the two of us walked into the forest behind our house. Although the sun was starting to set, the path was clearly lit. "What a perfect way to school. Can you believe this house was still available?" my mom said. I nodded, but said nothing. "We used to have family here, you know. I really like this place," my mom said, smiling. The next morning, I made my way into the kitchen and was greeted with a warm smile and pancakes. As I sat down to eat, my mother must have noticed that I looked a little nervous, and she sat down next to me. "Don't worry, you'll make friends here. I really have a good feeling," she said. Looking back, I can't really understand how after her husband left her, she could be so strong. I just hope that I can have some of her strength. I made my way down the path just as we had practiced every night. When I arrived at school, a tall teacher with thick glasses greeted me at the door and helped me into the classroom. I sat down among 10 other students, and the teacher began to speak out what the year was going to be like and what we would learn. No one was mean to me or anything, but no one really spoke to me either. All the kids were busy talking about their costumes for Halloween that they barely even noticed the new kid was here. There was this one little girl though that said hello. She sat 2 rows in back of me, and I figured that maybe she was new to school as well. She was very pretty with brown hair and glasses, and as I glanced back, she caught my gaze and gave me a big smile. I tried to smile back, but she was so pretty and it was so hard not to be shy. Turning back around, I tried to listen to the teacher, but I was really just thinking about her. School ended for the day around 3 o'clock. I grabbed my bag and rushed outside towards the path to my house, very anxious to run home and tell my mom about the pretty girl that had smiled at me. Hurrying home down the path, I suddenly tripped over something and fell hard, scraping my knee. Sitting up to examine my injury, I looked back to see what made me stumble. I saw the biggest crow I had ever seen. Strange too, what was wrong with its eyes? As I made my way closer to examine it, I heard someone behind me. "Hello, I know you're from school," she said. Surprised, I looked up quickly to see the pretty girl from class. Wondering if she had seen me fall, I was embarrassed and got onto my feet quickly. My knee hurt badly, but I was more worried how I looked to her. Yeah, I think I saw you in class today. My name is Jimmy," I said. Smiling back, she replied, "I'm Margaret." We walked together down the trail. "How's your leg?" she asked. It's okay," I said, trying to act tough. "You live down here too?" She told me that her family had lived in this town for some time and that she also had a path behind her home leading to the forest. We became friends instantly. As we got to my house, she surprised me by asking, "Can I see what your house looks like? You made it sound so nice." I quickly smiled and knocked on my front door. My mom answered the door, very surprised to see Margaret next to me. Smiling, she said, "You don't waste time making friends, huh, Jimmy? Are you going to introduce me to this young lady or just stand there?" My face turned red as I muttered, "This is Margaret. She lives around here and we met at school today." Trying to show my excitement, I acted cool. "She wanted to come over," I said. "Hello, ma'am. I wanted to see your house. My family also lives here," Margaret said and smiled. "Come on in, dear. I just finished this nice batch of cookies," my mom replied. As the 3 of us sat down on the kitchen table talking, we got into the subject of Halloween. "What are you going as, Margaret?" my mom asked. "I'm going as a witch this year. I heard they were really scary," Margaret said. "Witches aren't scary," I quickly stated. Smiling again, Margaret corrected herself. "Well, I was gonna go as a witch, but my family's out of town this weekend and I don't really know, well, I don't really have a place to stay. It's a business trip and they said I'm too young to go with them. They asked my regular babysitter, but she got sick yesterday and now..." My mom interrupted her. "Well, if it's alright with your parents, you're more than welcome to stay here this weekend and trick-or-treat with us." It was that moment I realized that I had the greatest mother in the world. "What do you think, Jim?" my mom asked, holding back a smile. "Yeah, that's a great idea," I said. My mom drove Margaret home to meet her parents and asked them if she could stay with us during the weekend. When my mom got back, I asked her how it went. "It went great," my mom said. "I think her mother and aunt take care of her. They live in a beautiful little cottage down the trail. They invited me in and we talked for a little while. Both of them thought it was a great idea. I do have one question though. You have a crush on this girl, correct?" Pretending I didn't hear her, I quickly ran to my room and closed the door. "Got homework, Mom. Love you," I said, a little embarrassed. That night I tried to sleep, but was too excited for Halloween. It was just a few days off and I already made a friend. This weekend was going to be great. Thinking about how this really might be a new start, I began to notice something in the corner of my room. At first I thought I was dreaming, but then my eyes slowly began to focus. There was a tall man with long dark hair and a gray beard. His eyes were piercing and focused. They stared unblinking out the window. My body started to tremble in fear. I hid under the blankets, pretending it wasn't real and praying he hadn't seen me. Peeking out from under, I almost screamed out in terror. He was just floating there, holding a huge axe with what looked like blood on it. I wanted to scream and run out of the room, but I was frozen. I couldn't even make a sound. I don't know how I fell asleep, but when I woke up the next day, he was gone, and it was like it never happened. I wanted to tell my mom, but I just couldn't for some reason. I really don't know why. The week went by quickly, except for every single night, the man in my room would return, always holding the large axe in his hands. Some nights he would just peer out the window, and other nights he would just pace back and forth. I could see his mouth move, but no words ever came out. I watched him in fear and awe, and the night before Halloween he finally turned his head and looked directly at me. He locked eyes with mine, and he took a step forward. I pulled the blankets over my head and started to shake in fear. Was this real? Was I going crazy? Halloween day came, and I almost told Margaret about the man in my house. I felt guilty for not telling her, but I was afraid she would think I was crazy or something. And looking forward to this weekend is the only thing that I've been happy about in a long time. Margaret and I went house to house that night. I tried to have a good time, but wondered what was going to happen tonight when she stayed at my house. Would the man come again? Would he see her? She asked me what was wrong, and I pretended it was nothing. As we got back to my house, my mom had prepared a sleeping space for us in the living room. Margaret was going to sleep on the couch, and I had a blanket spread on the floor. We compared candy, both agreeing we were tired. My mom was sleeping in the room next to us and told us to wake her up if we needed anything at all. That night, as Margaret and I went to sleep, the window started to howl against the windows. I told myself that I had never seen the man outside my room, so I thought it would be safe here. I felt guilty, but it was just so nice having a friend with me at night. I couldn't face him again alone. The storm became louder and louder as the clock struck midnight. Staring at the ceiling, I was starting to become more tired when I heard Margaret ask, "Jimmy, are you awake?" "Yeah, I'm awake," I said. "I can't sleep. It's freezing. Do you have another blanket?" she asked me. I told her I had one in my room, then froze, realizing what I just said. I would have to go back into my room. Searching for any other option, I knocked on my mom's door for a blanket, but she didn't reply back. The storm was so loud that even knocking didn't wake her. I thought about yelling her name, but realized how childish that would make me look to Margaret. "Didn't you say you had a blanket in your room?" she asked again. I took a deep breath and replied, Yeah, I'll get it for you." Opening the door slowly, I saw no sight of any ghost or monster. I held my breath and quickly ran to the far closet to find an extra blanket. Fumbling through my clothes, I paused as I heard the door close behind me. The wind outside was so strong that it almost shook the house, and it took every ounce of my courage to turn around. There was no ghost, though. It was just Margaret. "Oh, it's just you," I said. Margaret smiled and replied, "Who were you expecting? The boogeyman?" It was then I noticed something was off about her. As she locked the door behind her, I realized she was taller than before. Much taller. With the door closed, it was very dark in my room, but were her eyes red? I thought I could see two small red dots looking back from where she should be. She laughed and softly said, "You shouldn't have let me in, Jimmy." "Margaret, this isn't funny," I stammered. "I find it very funny," she said. As she made her way across the room, I saw a large knife in her hand. The moon shone across her face, and what was once a beautiful young girl was now an old, haggard-looking woman with a hideous smile on her face. "You want a hug, Jimmy?" she asked. I backed into the corner of my room and screamed out for my mother.
"She can't hear you, Jimmy. She's never gonna hear you,"
Margaret said. Having nowhere to go, I watched her get closer and closer. I was so scared now that I couldn't even move. All I could do was watch as she lifted the knife over her head and smiled wickedly. What happened next I will never forget for the rest of my life. Before she could bring the knife down, something caught her gaze. She looked over towards the window and sunk back in fear. She screamed out and fell onto the floor, trying to desperately run, but he stopped her. Holding on to her with one hand, the tall man brought down the axe onto her neck. She screamed in agony and fear, her neck now half off as she still tried to crawl away. Placing his foot down roughly on her back, he pinned her to the floor. He then brought the axe down hard with both hands, severing her neck almost entirely. There was a strong pull and then a grisly ripping sound. I heard a horrible pop sound as the man ripped her head clean off her body. All I could do was watch as he opened the window and carried her body and head out to the forest. Stunned, I looked out the window. I could barely see, yet I just stood there and watched until he disappeared completely. I tried waking my mother, but she couldn't seem to hear as I shouted her name. After I checked to see that she was safe, I went back into my room and just stood at the window. I think I was in some kind of shock. After a while, I heard her door open. I ran over to her and hugged her as hard as I could. "Good morning, dear. Did you two have fun last night?" she asked, seemingly having heard nothing. At a loss for words, I slowly just nodded my head. "Tell Margaret that breakfast will be ready in 2 shakes. Is she still asleep on the couch?" my mom asked. I replied, mumbling something about her mom already having picked her up. Then my mom went into the kitchen to start breakfast. I wondered what I would say if her parents did actually show up to collect her. In the unlikely event that her parents were human, they would probably be thankful she was gone. That year was the start of a new chapter of my life. I now knew that demons, witches, ghosts, evil things weren't just fairy tales. They were all real. I'm older now and I have a family of my own. My son was born a few months back and I've never spoken a word of this to anyone, especially not my wife. I've never found the right moment to tell her. One last thing. A few days after Halloween, as a child, my mom had taken a photo album and sat down next to me. I watched as she casually thumbed through the photos, and then I stopped her. "Hey Mom, who is that man?" I asked. "Him? Oh, that's your great-grandfather," she replied. I stared at the photo. It was him. I slept better after that. I would still see him from time to time, staring out my window into the darkness. Margaret was not the last evil thing I would come across, and I am now worried for the safety of my newborn son. It's now Halloween night, and as I stand over my son's crib, I stare out into the shadows of the forest beyond. I can feel that something is coming for us, but they don't know one thing. We are not alone. After working a hard day, I came home to see my girlfriend cradling our child. I didn't know which was more frightening, seeing my dead girlfriend and stillborn child, or knowing that someone broke into my apartment to place them there. My husband woke me up by kissing my cheek when he got home late. This morning I woke up and checked my phone. He stayed with a friend last night. I like to sing in the shower sometimes. When I got out of the last one, the fogged up mirror read, "You have a lovely voice." And I live alone. My wife just ran into the living room to ask me if I was okay because she could hear my terrible coughing from across the house. I just looked at her and said, "I wasn't coughing." The neighbors upstairs are awfully noisy. When I went to my landlord to go tell him, he had a puzzled look on his face and said, "That room has been vacant for months." I had a dream that a man was watching me sleep from outside my bedroom window. When I woke up, I found footprints inside, next to my bed. My girlfriend is scared of horror movies. They make her paranoid, which can be tricky when I'm watching her through her living room window. I found a new bottle of my best friend's favorite scotch on the kitchen counter today. He died in a drinking accident 6 years ago. I keep having a recurring dream that I'm murdered by some man that I've never even met. I thought it was stupid until I went on a blind date and saw him at the table. My little nephew came up to me while I was at my sister's house and told me he saw my boyfriend outside. My boyfriend died around 4 months ago. As I play in the basement, my mother calls me from upstairs. From behind me, I feel an arm grab my shoulder and I hear my mom whisper to me, "Don't go up there." Roses are red, violets are blue. There is someone right behind you. I finally got into my car and drove away from the gas station. When I felt safe enough to breathe, I heard a whisper behind me saying, "Leaving so soon?" I was starving and lost in the woods until I found another hiker. I'm full now, but I just wish he hadn't screamed so loud. I arrived at the funeral a few minutes late. Nobody acknowledged me and I was confused, but I quickly figured out why when I looked into the casket and saw myself. Being one of the first people on the moon has its perks. Being the only one forgotten doesn't. "Please stop," I whimpered as he fastened my other arm to the table. "If you let me go, I promise I won't tell anyone." He looked at me with a wicked smile and laughed and said, "How do you think I got you? They're the ones who gave you to me." When I put my little cousin to sleep, she asked me, "Why do I have to go to sleep?" I answered, "All little girls have to go to sleep now." She then pointed at the wall and said, "What about that little girl?" I'm all alone at home during a storm when the lights go out. Lightning strikes and there's a man standing in my hallway with a knife in his hand. Outside my 3-year-old's bedroom, I hear her say, "But mommy, I don't want to." My voice replies, "It's okay, sweetie. All little girls stab their daddies." There was this one night last year when I was 17. At 9 o'clock, I was meeting up with my cousin to go to a Halloween party with him. We'll call him L. While I was walking in his house, I heard the sound of a car coming up next to me, and out of instinct, I turned around and saw the car started driving closer to me. I could barely see into the car because of the tinted windows, but then it drove directly parallel to me, and I saw the window open. The person in the driver's seat said, "Hey kid, where you heading?" Now my heart starts beating a little faster, and I get a little frightened. I looked closer into the car and saw 3 more people inside the car. Now, I'm 17, so I'm aware that I shouldn't answer this guy and keep walking. I then approached the end of the block, and he turns left to block me from crossing the street. My heart started racing as he said, "Hey, I asked you a question, and it's rude not to answer." At this point, I was terrified and had no idea what to do, so I turned around and booked it down the one way that they couldn't drive into, and soon I arrived at Elle's house. I told him everything that happened, but we completely forgot about it and had a pretty amazing night. At 1:30, Elle and I walked back to my house because he was going to stay the night. Obviously, all the trick-or-treaters were gone, so the streets were empty. As we were walking, we passed by the place where the incident happened with the cars, and I started getting a little paranoid, remembering what happened. My fear became true when the same looking car pulled up about 50 feet away from us, and 3 tall guys dressed in black hoodies came out of the car with sharp objects in their hands. We looked at them for a second, and they stared at us. They then started charging at us. I screamed for Elle to run, and we both started running. Elle and I are very athletic. We were on the track team at our school, so we were pretty fast. I started dialing for the police and put my phone up to my ear. While doing this, Elle and I hopped the neighbor's fence to get into their backyard to catch our breath. As soon as I landed on the ground, though, I looked into the neighbor's upstairs window, and she was staring down at us from the window as if she knew that we were going to be there. We left her backyard and saw the car down the block drive away. When we got home, Elle went into my room to go blow up the mattress and relax, while I just went into the bathroom to puke. After getting out of the bathroom, I felt so good and relieved that whatever just happened was over, until I looked out the living room window, and standing there was one of the men dressed in the same black hoodie. I felt instantly sick again and thought to myself, what the hell do these guys want from me? Why are they doing this, and how do they know where I live? The man had a knife in his hand, and he put it up to his neck and pretended to cut his throat, symbolizing that I was the dead man. I saw him then run down the block, and I've never seen these people since. The only person that knows about the story is Elle and I was too afraid to tell anybody. But it's been a year since the occurrence, and nothing else has happened, and ever since that day, I started taking different routes to my cousin's house, so I can never meet up with those people again. When I was younger, I had a problem of always staying up until 2 a.m. every other night watching TV shows and movies while eating a bunch of snacks. On Halloween night, I came home from trick-or-treating with my friends and stayed up all night watching the movie Spider-Man on my TV in my room. Halfway into the movie, I happened to hear a tapping from the back door. In case you're wondering, my room is right next to the living room, which is next to the front side of the house, and the back door is on the opposite side of the house. I was laying down on my bed and thought it was probably a stick or something, so I just brushed it off. Then I heard what sounded like a knock. It wasn't too loud. It wasn't loud enough to wake anyone up, but it was definitely loud enough to get someone's attention. Again, I assumed it was something hitting the door, and I turned off the TV and closed my eyes. I assumed that since it was late, I was just tired and hearing noises. I was in that sleepy state where you fade in and out of consciousness, and I looked back at the clock and saw that some time has passed. I started closing my eyes again until I heard the sound of pressure on the floorboards in my kitchen. It didn't sound like a normal house noise, so I didn't know what to think of it. My parents were sleeping, my little brothers were in the room sleeping as well, and my older sister wasn't supposed to be home. The noises went from floorboard pressure to just noises of someone looking through cabinets. I thought that maybe my sister's plans changed and she came home, so I texted her, "Please, make a little less noise, I can hear you all the way from my room." I was a little scared and took my pocket knife that I leave in my drawers next to my bed, just in case. My sister texted me back 30 seconds later saying, "I'm sleeping over at my friend's house tonight." I felt like my heart was in my throat when I read that. Who else could have been making noise in the kitchen? I took my pocket knife in my hand and got up slowly to go to the kitchen. As I was walking to the kitchen, I realized that the noises had ceased. I started calming down a little and walking more freely until I got to the kitchen and saw a black silhouette staring straight back at me. I was terrified, so much so that I couldn't even let out a scream. I just stood there paralyzed, watching this man stare at me. Words couldn't even describe what I felt at that point. Upon closer look, I realized that he had some kind of demon-looking Halloween mask. What happened next is something that is never gonna leave me. He put his hands down on the floor and started charging at me on his hands and feet in a demonic type way while making demon sounds with his mouth. I finally snapped out of it, took out the knife and yelled, "If you dare touch me, I'll cut your damn face off." He looked up at the knife and stared for a while. He then slowly started getting up and just stared at me, or towards me, I couldn't even tell because he had the mask on. As he looked up at me, he just blurted out one thing: "I'm gonna love coming back here to finish you and your family off." That pissed me off. I chased him with the knife all the way to the back door. My dad heard my screams from before and ran downstairs and saw the man climbing over the fence from the living room window. After climbing over the fence, the man just ran away, and that was it. Nothing ever happened after this, but I did suffer from paranoia and depression for a couple of months. I even had to go to therapy for a while. But I know that if that man ever came back today, I would be ready to get him before he gets me. This story is the reason why I stopped trick-or-treating and stopped even looking at abandoned houses. One day I was trick-or-treating with 3 of my best friends, one of them being my cousin. We were going from house to house asking for candy, even though we were 16 at the time. One of my friends said that his old house was in the area. We'll call him Albert. After Albert told us that no one lives in it and it was abandoned, our eyes lit up. Being our teenage selves, we decided to go and check it out. When we got there, the house looked to be in horrible condition. We then circled around the house and went into the backyard. Albert told us that we needed to climb in through the window, and surprisingly, the window was unlocked. While my friends were climbing in, I looked up at the second floor window and I was so sure that I saw a shadow of a man there, but it was gone a second after I looked at it. I brushed it off as me being paranoid since it was Halloween, and I joined all my friends and climbed in through the window. After we entered, we all picked up on the oddly good smell of the house. It smelled like air freshener had just been sprayed everywhere. We were looking around for a while, going to the basement and checking out the rooms. Literally 2 minutes passed since we walked in and we heard the noise of someone walking on the wooden floors upstairs. Now my suspicions were confirmed. There was definitely a man upstairs. Me and my friends gave each other that look and raced out of there. We started climbing out of the windows one by one, and while I was climbing out of the window, I looked back into the dark room and saw and heard a man scream, "Wait, don't go! I have candy for you guys!" I felt like 1,000 pounds weight fell into my chest at that moment. I jumped out of the window and feared that he might grab my leg before I got out. I slipped out and I felt him grab on my leg for a split second, but I was already out the window. I landed on the ground outside and we ran to my other friend's house. We were all terrified. Over there we decided that we should probably keep what happened to ourselves. I still wonder to this day if I made a mistake not telling my parents or calling the police, because he could still be out there, and who knows what that psychopath is doing.